I asked Kristen to check in just to make sure that everything's working. Um, so yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna change my screen. I was just sketching this little motorcycle for practice. But I've got this one up and ready to go because this is the one you helped me with.
Yeah, and I see it on I'm on YouTube now.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
two screening it.
This makes me feel more tech savvy doing this thing than anything else I've ever done.
Hack the mainframe, man.
I just feel like if 16-year-old like Twitch streamers can do it, like I should be able to do it.
They were born in the darkness, though. It's tough.
Yeah, but come on, I've got circuit boards for bones in my body. I've done a
Yeah, but
lot of maintenance.
like everybody's dancing on TikTok, and that doesn't make me want to do it.
I don't think TikTok's going to be here to stay. I think it's got too much. I mean, it'll stay here with the use, but I don't think it's going to reach commonplace just because of how many people are nervous about who's actually watching that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just hang out for a few more minutes. I think there's like 3 people on currently. I'm just going to introduce myself in the chat. Feel free to do the same. Just like write like a short thing about yourself and then just say hi. And then we'll get started here in just a sec. Yeah, I had to get that sketch in because the hardest thing I found about these workshops is that it's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but it's really hard for me to draw and talk at the same time. So I need you to also just help fill in some of these blanks because I sound like I have like a speaking disability. Like I can hear it going back over because
You pick the right person to fill dead air with noise.
yeah, but you have articulated noise to share.
Or yes, very very much so.
Yeah, I don't know. It just felt like a good fit because you were like so helpful with this sketch, and I feel like so many things came from that, and like I just want to give you credit where credit is due because like half of the ideas on this thing were like derived from like your knowledge base, and
And
so
I'm still furious that Bloomberg decided to use the photo of that stupid vest with avocados on it
oh,
instead
I
of
know,
instead of the drawing.
I know. I've never disliked a another creative before, but it's just like all that photographer had to do was just not show up for work that day, and
Yeah,
it would have been the cover. Yeah, that was frustrating. But
but such is life.
yeah, I don't know. It was good for me professionally. Enough like illustrations came from that, and I got to put their name on my portfolio or my resume, so I was happy at the end of the day. But I just feel like I mean that was definitely one of those significant like illustrations that I got like feedback from somebody outside of my like general design world, and I feel like that's always been a like a through line through my work. Like I recognize that my best work comes from strong art direction if I'm not in charge of the project, you know? Like personal projects I can take through to the end and like they'll be I'll be happy with them, but I feel like outside of that, like I thrive when I have strong like management and art direction around a project because I get really focused down on a single thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, writing's the same way too, where it's like someone just says, "Write 500 words about this," and I'm like, well, what?
Yeah,
Like, you can, people can do or create anything, but without any like guiding posts of even like what not to do, it's just like, well, here you go. You're going to be disappointed.
yeah, for sure.
I remember writing like a 10-page article on this adventure bike trip that Cycle World wanted like maybe 2 pages on. and there was just like no way to edit it down. And it was like palpably disappointing. And I was like, oh, this isn't what you wanted at all, is it?
Yeah. Yeah,
They're
I've
like,
had
no, there's
problems
like
like,
three paragraphs dedicated to food. Like, no, not what we wanted.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know. So like what I've been doing with these workshops is sharing kind of my process, and like that's easy enough for me to do here because it's like this is what I do to draw a motorcycle. This is how I handle like an interior rendering. But I think what hopefully whoever's watching this can gain from your insights, like as we go through and you critique some of these sketches I've been doing, is that like design happens like I mean design doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like there's always
Yeah.
going to be other stakeholders, there's other people involved, and um, you know, their perspectives are the ones that matter. You know, generally the marketing team and like managers have slightly more experience than the designer because they've been doing it longer, they understand the market better, and that's just kind of what their educational background also gives them. So I think a lot of designers have a hard time at least starting off stepping into a space where it's like, you know, we want you to do the next generation like pickup truck, and they have all these drawings, and at the end of it their manager's like, this is not going to fly, you know, for who you're designing it for.
So anyway, I removed the bed because I think pickup beds are ugly, and I put it on 30s because hot sketch.
Exactly. Yeah, so I just think that hopefully what anyone gets out of this is that design
There's
doesn't
an
happen in a
idiot on the
vacuum.
other. There's an idiot at the other end telling me what to do.
Well, you happen to be one of the smarter idiots I know, and that's why I asked you to do this because I feel like of all the like working professional slash friends I have, your opinion often resonates in a little different way because I think you are aware and share your limitations like really clearly, but I think you also have like a really um, I don't know, diverse like view of a lot of different things, and that's what makes you useful to like a designer like myself because I get kind of myopic in the things I'm talking about. Um, and it can just be like really refreshing to have somebody with your perspective like look at this stuff and you know give me a clear view.
Well, thank you. That's almost too nice. I don't know what to say to that. I have nothing quippy in response.
That's fine. Um, I just I think that that's important to have because like I think you are honest about like you're very humble like you know this is just my opinion, but your opinion is always backed up by like reasoning that I have a hard time arguing with, and like that's the kind of feedback that I think makes a designer better at their job. So you know what? I think we've got enough people here currently that we should just like get into it. Um, so why don't you kind of explain what your initial like idea was? Because I pitched this to you as like, you know, I kind of want to do something that we're both interested in. It's just like two-wheeled vehicles, and you sent me like a short design brief.
Sure, and I'll just introduce myself to the viewers out there. I'm Joe
Yeah.
Gustafson. I'm a public relations lead at Harley Davidson. I've also worked as a freelance motorcycle rider and as a marketing coordinator for a soft goods motorcycle protective apparel brand. So Ian was kind enough to invite me to talk about, what stakeholder inputs change designs and what opinions and facts and extra information go into turning a design into a finished production vehicle. And the brief Ian and I discussed was kind of this interesting startup that wanted to take on the lives of the world in a little bit more premium fashion. So it was a subscription hybrid model that was going to be a two-wheel vehicle for urban-minded luxury consumers that had wanderlust in their veins. So they could own the vehicle, but a subscription would also allow them to travel to Spain or Monte Carlo or South Africa and find the same vehicle there and turn it on and it'd be theirs for the weekend or their stay. So we're kind of deciding what that two-wheel vehicle looks like and how that would fit the business model of this fictional company.
Yeah, which is like more than enough to go off, especially if we're just trying to fill like 2 hours of like a design exercise, which is perfect. So based on that, I kind of took a really shotgun approach and designed out just 4 really rough design directions. And Joe hasn't really seen any of these yet, so I just want to get like your honest opinion about like these really rough designs and how you think that they would work or fail based on kind of like how you see this working. So basically what Joe is going to do is like art direct this whole thing. So we'll just go through these. I'll explain the 4 of them, and then I'll put all 4 of them up, and you can kind of tell me what you like and what you don't like in terms of what's working, and then we can start like revising the design, and then you can also just kind of like riff on like why you think that these decisions are important while I'm trying to draw them out.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So the first one that I thought of is like pretty clearly just a standard scooter proportion, but I really like the maxi scooters that are really popular in Europe, and I think like a scaled down, simpler version of that that's really sleek and has like the battery is nice and low, and a low profile tire will be like more approachable for the kind of person that would do like a subscription service. Um, and I don't know, it just feels a little less intimidating to me, but I don't know if that necessarily is a good or bad thing. So that's kind of just my first take on this one.
Cool. Is that a 2-up design or is that for one person?
I think all of them should potentially. I don't know. It's kind of like, what do you think about that? Because if we're thinking about a subscription service, like, is that too much of a liability to have 2 people on it? Because I've never seen like a bike you can rent that fits 2 people.
It is a liability from a business model sense, but I've also been seeing as a startup customers using Lime as 2-up, 3-up, 4-up, inappropriate
Yeah,
type of usage.
sure.
And also if these users are on vacation or going with somebody, that might be something we want to explore as we look at all of them. But I
Yeah,
definitely
that's
like
actually
this
a
one.
good point. Vacation riding, like you think of all the people on scooters riding around. Vacation. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense actually. So maybe that becomes a defining characteristic. That's useful for sure.
Also something we didn't discuss when we initially talked about this.
Yeah, for sure. And if I honestly want to like just come up with something with somebody else, I think that sounds like a lot of fun, and I enjoy. One of the things I miss the most being a freelancer that works from home is I miss like that in the moment design thinking. If that happens, that's totally fine. And honestly, I think it's a plus. So that was concept A. Concept B is kind of like a nostalgia play. So essentially, this is just like a scrambler motorcycle with slightly added functionality. So my thought process was kind of like adding this tank up here because it doesn't have gas. That becomes like a flip up storage space for things that people have. And I think like having like knobby tires and
Mm-hmm.
a headlight that looks like more standardized but is like LED powered, and a rack of batteries that just fits inside like a perimeter style frame would give somebody the sense of like, oh, this is obviously a motorcycle, but with some key differences in the powertrain.
Cool.
So that was B. C is kind of like an urban racer vibe. For this one, I was kind of thinking like more of a like an e-bike, downhill mountain bike supermoto kind of a thing. I do some work with Untitled Motorcycles, and Hugo Eccles from their San Francisco office designed this really, really cool Zero custom bike, which has this custom frame that kind of looks like a Ducati frame that connects the headstock down to the bottom, and it's just like a really unique look. The thing I like about this one is it's got a lot of pass-throughs from the frame so you can see the battery, and then pass-throughs on the seat, which I think makes this feel really light and agile and like kind of sporty.
Yeah, I like that it doesn't have a tank too. Even though that might make using your body a little bit harder, I like the unbroken backbone line.
Hmm.
I think that's really unique and distinct.
Yeah, I could see that being useful in the end too, because that does feel like a key selling point. Because I think a lot of people get stuck when they think about designing an electric motorcycle because we've been so accustomed to what a motorcycle looks like that it's hard for us to fill in a different shape.
Yeah, and a lot of customer research around like the electric scooter market and e-bicycles is showing that customers feel not as intimidated because it's not moving around, and also because they look lighter,
Hmm.
even though in many cases they aren't. Like
Yeah.
a e-scooter is far heavier than, something with a gas motor attached to it, but it
Hmm.
looks clean, it looks simple, and obviously not having heat or vibration is a big help.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
What spread of body types do you see on these three so far?
Um, well, here, let's do the fourth one because you can see them all compared to each other on the last slide that I have up here. And then I think you can see like some like overlaps and some divergences.
Sure.
This final one is a little bit inspired by like those little Honda Ruckus scooters. Um, and then I know Harley has that lower, what's that model called?
It's a lightweight electric concept.
Yeah, like that was really inspiring, and I like the idea of having something that has like a history to it. Like I think these old style scooters were pretty popular back in the day. I feel like I've heard you tell me that before, and I like the simplicity of really knocking back the frame to something super geometrical, and then the seat becomes super planar and flat. Um, there's just something, again, kind of like Concept A, that's super approachable about this one, but it also has, I think, a degree of playfulness that if we are thinking about something that's used in a situation that is not like a maybe a commuter situation, but is more like, I'm on vacation and I belong to this like program, and maybe I do ride this like to work here and there when it's really sunny out, but because I'm part of this program and I'm on vacation in Florida or something, I want to rent this thing to get around for a couple of days.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. These are the four right here. And so I think if I look at consistencies in them, I think one of the main things is finding areas like negative spaces, basically, because I think one of the big hallmarks of an electric vehicle is, at least right now, I think maybe the design language will change later, but at least right now, it's showing the absence of what you expect. It's the absence of of a standard motor. It's the absence of a fuel tank. And I think that a designer would be I think, losing out on a lot of design opportunities if they didn't like approach that with some degree of mindfulness.
Yeah, it's a big part of electric, and one thing that's a watch out with that is too awkward can almost, it's kind of like uncanny valley,
Yeah,
where you don't quite know where things are and where they should be. So it's really cool, this back and forth between the opportunity that EV unlocks, but
hmm,
also what we've seen as a touch point. It's kind of like that pink used to be a boy's color,
hmm,
but yet nobody thinks that anymore because marketing is drilled in our head. Oh well, you can't have that, and so it's interesting with playing with these designs, and especially EV, where we can push that boundary
hmm.
and really make a new line for people to understand, what these vehicles could look like, and also what's necessary from a familiarity standpoint.
Yeah, that's a really tough line to walk, especially when you're creating something new that like doesn't exist. Like finding enough people that like the thing um, and are willing to take a chance on it, and enough people that have always loved the thing and are now disappointed that it's changing.
Yeah, and I think something with this brief in mind, with the startup mentality, you're talking about a customer that's looking to make an impact on their social media pages, to leave with a story, whether they're traveling to work or going on vacation. So having something different, I don't think, is a drawback for this project, because you're going to want something that's a hallmark.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. So within these four, like if you were considering like this hypothetical persona or demographic that would use this vehicle? Like, which one are you leaning towards and why?
And I got a couple questions
Yeah, finish.
on the materials and the construction. Like, are you seeing how are you seeing these built? Like, is the first one a more traditional scooter monocoque where it's a clamshell in two pieces, and are the others? Is it steel? Is it aluminum? Are they tubular frames?
So the first one, I'm not sure what that one would be. It's a I'm trying to think of the maxi scooter that I'm basing this off of. It's that
Like a like a
BMW,
like a Bergman or like an F800? Not an F800. The F600 is it?
the C600.
Yeah.
So it's God, there's one specific image I'm trying to find. Okay, here we go. So somebody took this and turned it into a concept, but right now, like this is the one I'm thinking of. This guy. Shoot, I lost it. This guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the electric BMW.
Yeah, so in that case, I think this is actually, to me, that looks like a stressed member. I mean, maybe there's a backbone in the frame, possibly, but it's a little hard to tell. But that's kind of what I was thinking. I'm leaning towards stressed member, but it looks like there could be a backbone and some parts that are on the back of that vehicle.
Yeah, so like formed steel panels that are welded into that, and
Here's
then
a view of the other side. That's kind of what I was thinking when I sketched that one out.
yeah, and the cool thing about that design is it allows for battery packs to be swapped out
hmm
and the motor pretty efficiently. So if a user, we could, like in this hypothetical scenario, have an upgrade scenario where we could have one model with different battery pack options.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, like, if we think about, I mean, what kind of frame would support that kind of a thing? Like,
Well, you could do it with, like, for example, the third and the second. You could basically do like fixed battery packs within that housing, but
hmm
you'd be limited on how big you could go pretty quickly. I
hmm
mean, you could play with power density and stuff, but um, with something that could, like, if you build it like a limousine, which would be bad from a strength perspective, but interesting from a modularity perspective, where
hmm
there's a front half and a back half, and you're
hmm
just filling the stuff in between.
Oh, that's interesting to
Um,
think about.
and because like with if you have like a trellis frame that wraps around like the third, you can't go out
hmm
horizontally, and then it looks a little bit delicate. Like, is the battery pack just kind of hanging? Is there like a bash plate in the front of it, or do you see it as more just kind of in space?
I don't know. I think like when I think about those battery packs being added and replaced, if this is a subscription model, I actually kind of think that what would be more important than having different size batteries being able to plug into the same frame, I think it's probably more important to have the battery be easily removable, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like an e-bike frame. I'm going to draw it real quick. So if this is the down tube for a bicycle frame, and then the pedals are down here. A lot of those e-bike batteries just sit right here on that down tube, and they have a little handle on the top that you can just like pop out, and then when you walk into work or if you walk into your house when you get home, that's how you like recharge it. So I think maybe if we think about how that battery is replaced, that might be important too.
Yeah, and there from a business planning perspective,
hmm
there is a conglomerate of OEMs agreeing on a startup concept called Gogoro, which is a shared battery standard
hmm
where you could go to a station, whether you have like OEM A and OEM B, and still share a battery at that capacity. So from a startup perspective, that might be a possibility to plug into a distribution network and
Hmm,
also have kind of an ease of use story for the customer.
that's interesting. Um, so is Gogoro the name of the company?
Yeah, it's a network. It's Gogoro.
Do they have a scooter already? Because I just found this little guy.
Yeah, so they do have models out in the wild,
Okay.
but like other OEMs are looking at this as an opportunity to say, oh, like we could build a scooter or a vehicle to this, and then you could have multiple vehicles with the same battery. So you're not just tied to a form factor. So that's kind of interesting from a startup perspective, because then we could explore, let's say you buy concept A. If you're traveling, you can also, ride concept 3 ride concept 2 using the same battery pack.
Yep, I see what you're talking about. I just found it here on this page. So like you can see this image. It's like the battery packs that it has inside of it, and then this guy replacing it here. That's a good idea. I like that a lot, actually. Maybe I think that would be an important thing, or at least just for now, a useful thing. Let's just say we're using these battery packs, if you say that that's like something that companies are trying to jump on board with, like why wouldn't we also try to head in that direction if it's useful?
Yep. And then we also talked about the user of this vehicle not needing a license to operate. So since the nominal capacity is pretty low, we don't need a lot of cells. So that's something where, option 2 and 3, a more traditional motorcycle, you'd have a higher capacity pack. Since we're dealing with like a 50cc equivalent nearly around the world, we can get away with a smaller battery pack.
Okay, interesting. Looking at these concepts, like, do you think any of these form factors, like outside of the battery? So I think like moving forward into the revision phase, I'm going to try to focus on trying to fit those Gogoro style batteries, just because I think that's interesting, and I like the fact that it's something that's out there and being done right now. I think that's just a useful thing to focus on, so we don't get like too high in the sky. Like maybe it's powered by hydrogen. So I'll try to focus on fitting something that looks like this into the battery situation. Maybe we can show that like through the seat flipping up or something.
And I like option 1, even though it's not the raddest version. Like the traditional motorcycles in the 4th option are more forward looking and a little bit cooler, but I'm looking at option 1 because especially people in Europe know a maxi scooter, they know the form factor, and having large panels gives us better branding opportunities and colorway options. So you can make that real distinct, where I feel like the 4th option would kind of get lost in the crowd. I also think there's a cool option to explore there with how the seat is. If that's like an open mold, if that's like fiberglass or a plastic, you can play with different bag designs that could be modular. So that could be like, hey, this is I think low profile tires for this are a little bit of a miss, because we want to really focus towards that wanderlust customer. I don't think it needs dirt bike tires, but it does need something that's a little bit more aggressive and chunkier, like kind of like what a TW200 has.
Oh, yeah.
Just to kind of give it that like more ruffian type look while keeping, we want it to look high end, but I think there's something to play with that push and pull of function and form.
Yeah. I don't know how to spell adventurous. I just realized that as I was touching that. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I wonder how that would change the proportion of like a maxi scooter kind of a thing. Because the reason I drew them small like this is just kind of how I see them often, but I don't know if that's how they have to be. I mean, maybe that's another point of distinction. I look at the scooter like this and think.
Have you seen the Vespa Dakar scooter pictures?
No, but I'm gonna look it up so we can all follow along. You also have a really deep catalog of references, which I appreciate.
That your average startup CEO would not. But welcome to my private island while we talk about desert scooters.
Okay, but these tires are really small still. I mean,
they're still tiny. You're not modifying you're not tooling a different wheel, and you're not changing the size of the tire from a manufacturing standpoint, and you can still like find a fitment. It's just kind of playing with, the vibe and the look of it. So it could be cool because you could have one, if you buy like the city option, you could make like a quote unquote adventure option for, tooling around South Africa
Sure.
or
So
or Morocco.
yeah, I like that idea. So do you think that the diameter of the tires on A would need to be updated in the revision?
I do. I think the wheels are a little bit big,
Okay.
and they're a little bit complex looking from a
Hmm.
manufacturing standpoint because like 3-spoke, you got to have like the wall thickness on each spoke is going to be a little bit more so that it kind of throws off your weight as the
Hmm.
wheels go round and round.
So
So
would like
maybe
a cast wheel, like kind of what's under like a hubcap of most cars, be better, or do you think something like a spoked wheel?
I think a hub cast because
Okay.
with spoke, then we wouldn't have to worry like from a serviceability standpoint, you wouldn't have to have somebody checking spoke tension every
Sure.
500 miles.
Yeah,
If
I
it's
mean that
bent,
makes
if
sense.
it yeah, if it's bent, you replace it.
Yeah. So is this one kind of like this is kind of like what we're talking about, right? On this Vespa?
Yeah,
Okay. So just a solid wheel with some design in it. But I think hubcap wheels um, don't get enough love because they just cast in like circles in them, you know?
yeah.
Like you could do something more interesting than that. As long as it's balanced, right? That's all that matters.
Hmm.
Okay, so it feels like pretty strongly we're moving forward with like direction A, but like are there other aspects that you see like in B through D that you'd like to bring over, like visually or functionally?
I like the headlight nacelle on D. Like the shape looks kind of alternative and cool,
Hmm.
where it's kind of squared off. Um, I think I really want to ride C. that's, that's probably my favorite one.
I
But
think so too. But
from
explain why that's not a good fit for this situation.
so when you do U search or me search, as it's colloquially called, it's like when designers or marketers say, "This is what I like, so this is what everybody likes," and I've hit this in multiple points of my career, largely when I worked at Icon Motorsports, which was a soft goods protective motorcycle brand, where something in the office that everyone's like, oh my God, everyone's going to love this. This is the best colorway. It's the dopest fit. Like it's a bajillion dollars, but who cares because we're getting it for free. We're going to crush it. So then you buy deep, it goes on the sales floor, and it sits there for months.
Hmm.
And that's when you get burned because there's oftentimes periods where you're passionate and your vision intersects with the customer requirement, and what
Hmm.
doing that poorly and doing me search like burns you because you lose sight of the customer. You just
I've never
say,
heard it called me search before. That's perfect.
yeah, and it's kind of the difference between like art and design, right?
Yeah.
Like art is an individual vision to the world. You're saying something, it's a statement that you can trace back. And design has artistic components, but has, an end user in mind. So
Sure.
that's where when everyone, like when I was a motorcycle rider, a lot of motorcycle riders say, "Oh man, supermotos are the best because
Hmm.
they're high strung dirt bikes with race tires, and everyone should buy them." But motorcycle journalists don't have to maintain their motorcycles, so and supermotos are also very expensive.
Yeah.
So most customers don't choose to buy them because of these dynamic factors involved. So that's why you know when I look back at when I'm making a marketing decision or helping sell something up the chain, it's like what is that additional input that you have to be aware of.
Yeah. The other thing that you explain and that makes me think about is the recognition I had when I used to go around like the biggest snob about the only real drivers drive stick shifts. And like I would hassle like my aunt about that, like, oh, your car would be more fun if you had a stick. Um, and like I came to the realization that like no one likes stick shifts. They represent like 12% of all cars sold, maybe even less now. But because a few loud like internet people like myself, like, oh, I would love that car if it had a stick shift. Like, they only get that car if they sell 1,000, maybe 100,000 of the automatics. And when I realized that, like, I started to really appreciate, like, you need a mass market appeal object if you want that niche object from that same company to be able to exist.
Yeah, and I mean, a stick shift's a great example because a lot of people aren't aware of the engineering, purchasing, and manufacturing work that goes into making that happen. From
Mm-hmm.
a simple parts count and component perspective to even like the dealership ordering based off their floor plan. Like, there's tons of stakeholders along the path that
Mm-hmm.
make it in stick harder to do. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you have the customer not show up, like that's kind of my internal rant is, every internet person said they wanted a rear wheel drive sports car that was under 3,200 pounds, that was around 25 grand, and was just like very simple and pure.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't sell very many Toyota BRZs,
Yeah, right.
but they sell a ton of Mustangs in automatic.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of that's always the watch out with, like, how can you balance and what you're bringing to the table with realities of the customer on the other end. And I'm not saying make it because your boss is going to be happy. It's always kind of like, what's the situation you're trying to solve for?
So like in those situations, like I as a designer, I mean, I think that I'm maybe a little bit more aware of my limitations because I think just as a personality type, like I try to be really upfront about what I don't know because I like the idea of being, educated or proven wrong, but I don't think that a lot of people have that tendency, especially not designers who by their nature are like, "Oh, hey, look what I made," and want everybody to kind of get on board with them. Like, who do you think is like best positioned to like make those decisions, whether it's like at work or just people personally that have like really opened your eyes to like, listen, this is how the world actually works.
I think it's always confidence in your research, because oftentimes, like, the best opportunities aren't the most obvious ones. And you're going to have people with the same confirmation bias. So, like, let's say a purchasing manager got burned because they bought deep in this blue colorway, so they think blue will never sell again. So when they're in the room and they're being like, no, not that blue. I remember 15 years ago, like, that didn't work. And it was because they ordered a bunch of blue SUVs
Yeah.
for some reason. And a lot of it comes back to research and customer empathy. Like, Icon is a great example of that, because when that brand was first formed, a lot of motorcycle apparel was for either the classic biker or the sport bike person who was at a track. And the
Mhm.
gap that Icon saw was there was a blending of people that were never going to touch a track but had a different style. They
Mhm.
wanted skulls, they wanted loud colors, they wanted to make a statement, but they didn't fall into those camps. And it took a significant amount of work to sell that idea to distributors, to manufacturing companies, to purchasing managers, to say, yeah, we should put more skulls on sport bike helmets,
Mhm.
because that's what people want. So it always comes back to how well do you understand the customer at the end of the product,
Yeah.
and that's going to help you get the confidence to make that statement.
Yeah, I think I don't know that it's always something that I felt is like a I don't know, personally kind of a lack of experience on my end because the companies I've worked with are bigger companies that are like producing, you know, evolutions of the same product. Like I'm thinking of Samsung at the moment, and so like there's not a ton of consumer testing between like the Samsung Galaxy 1 and the Samsung Galaxy 7. It's like you're making changes because technology has evolved or like engineering came back and said like, "Hey, we found a way to make this like 10% flatter." And now you can
Yeah.
go design a new thing. And like that's kind
One
of the design that I've done in the past, and I wish that I had a little bit more like experience designing products that were from the ground up, I guess, because I think you have to do a lot more like user research in those cases.
Well, and I mean, it's always iterative too, and that's the kind of the interesting part about it is, like, people always ask, like, why did car companies in the 50s and 60s make new models, like new model versions every year? And that's because the tooling wore out. Like, they didn't have to.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the tooling would just like go kerplunk. I mean, then you saw things like fiberglass, and you saw low pressure molds, and you saw more complex casting on singular molds instead of multiples. So the iterative parts also unlock different opportunities, because then you can get a more complex casting and mold because you can manufacture it longer.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, like, we're going to make this aggressive decision. If it doesn't pay off, then you're on the hook for larger investments. So that's the flip side of that. But I mean, I think that's why the startup environment's really interesting, because sometimes it's the customer and sometimes your customer is also the investor. And that's when it gets really weird. So that's when you look at Lime and Scooter, who aren't necessarily designing a scooter for the best riding experience.
Mm-hmm.
They're building it for, hey, we can manufacture 10,000 of these in 2 weeks.
Yeah, right. It's a
And you're
really
seeing,
different like driving force.
yeah, because your design's going into a deck, so the CEO can get a Series B funding round,
Mm-hmm.
not, oh, we're thinking about this customer that's, 25 to 30 that wants a shareable mobility solution.
I really enjoy it when you start throwing around Silicon Valley buzzwords. Makes me feel
I
like
love it so much. We can do the whole we can do the whole joke about the TechCrunch joke, but
Ugh. It's my favorite thing ever. That's why I love that show. It's just like it's evolution for the sake of evolution. Like that kind of hubris that gets humanity into trouble. It's like, I don't know, I could do it, so I did it.
yeah, and I mean, that show's funny because it kind of, like, it is a good watch for a bunch of people because that is how it works. Like, I did work for a digital marketing company, worked in web development, so I got a lot of time with buzzwords and conference rooms. And it's interesting when you see dynamics at play at that level, because it's the product gets lost, but it doesn't. Like, people will throw around in a sales call, like, oh, we want a headless solution. The salesperson doesn't know what a headless solution is, but it sounds good. So as a designer and engineer, and what Silicon Valley shows is that push and pull of, entrepreneurial vision versus business reality, and, outside parties that don't have the knowledge base. But
Mhm.
that's, I think that's personally where good design always wins, is because it sells itself.
Sure, that's a good point. I like to think that. It's just it happens so rarely that the design is so singularly like correct that you can convince people that are otherwise so invested in what they think is the right answer that I don't know. Like it does happen. It just doesn't happen often enough for me as the designer.
No, it's, well, because you have, like, a bunch of people that sometimes good design competes with good engineering too.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point.
some people are sitting in a room and being like, oh man, that's going to add like 4 weeks to my development time. And they'll just fight you tooth and nail to say it's bad, not, hey, this is going to be a lot more for me to do.
Yeah, right. It's just you wish people were a little more honest about um, what their motivations were. Because I think that in a lot of situations, your motivation could maybe come off as like selfish, but I think like if you're more honest up front about like, listen, this is just going to be like a real pain in the ass to get done, like then you can at least move the conversation on like, okay, let's talk about timeline. Like what do you actually need to get this done in this way, as opposed to like somebody saying like, yeah, it's not going to work because of, some kind of fudged answer because really the answer is like they don't want to do it.
Yeah, and that's when it comes to the designer to kind of pull their ally into the conversation. Like, hey, I really think this colorway will sell X amount of units because from the research you've given us, like, this customer really wants a pearlescent top coat, and that's a
Mhm.
real differentiator for the sales floor. And that's a political. It's not political because it's knowing why you're making those design decisions. It's saying, I'm trying to deliver on this. So
Yeah.
if you're happy with selling X amount less units because we can't do Y, then that's fine. Like, that's the compromise. Everyone has to compromise. Like,
Yeah.
engineering, accounting, legal. I was in a lot of conversations at Icon around helmet molds about, oh, we really want this top vent, but it's going to be ruinously expensive
Mhm.
to do at
Yeah.
scale, and that's where everybody comes to agreement. And that's where, as a designer, if you can clearly communicate why you're designing it in a certain way, you can help, bring in everybody, instead of making people kind of think about their own area of the company.
Yeah. You saying allies also makes me think that I think strong designers, and maybe just this applies to professionals in general, are a little bit of a politician, you know? Like I'm pretty straightforward about what I think about things, and I've had a lot of people like mentors over the years like help me shift my view on how I handle myself at work. And I don't mean like in a negative way, but like one example that one of my buddies at Samsung again told me is that like you're too honest about how long something's going to take, and because of that, like the executive team is giving you more work than I think you should be doing. And like it was true. Like I was trying to make everybody happy, and so when the director would come by and say like, hey, can you do this, this, and this? I said, yeah, I can do that, and like, do you need it today? Do you need it like right now? And I would like try to bend over backwards to make him happy. But what it ended up doing is like making him ask me for more things because I showed myself as somebody who like wanted to please, and so he just took it. If you've got a candy machine that's just like shelling out bar after bar, like you don't really ask questions why, whether it's like moral or not. You're just you're getting a new chocolate bar. And he was just like, just pad like your estimate a little bit. Don't outright lie about like, oh, it's going to take months. Just like, if you think it's going to take a day, say it's going to take a day and a half because, one, things are going to come up that you don't expect, and two, like, it's just going to give you a little more breathing room. And it's going to make you a better designer. So when he framed it that way, I realized that it wasn't like a devious thing that he was suggesting. It was more like just be a little more pragmatic and understand like human nature in this situation.
Well, and it also comes down to like articulating what you want. Like I learned, very early that if you let people get away with your time, like, you get request A, request B, request C, and really only request B is what you need to further your individual pursuits, then you need to just clearly articulate that and also be thinking in the background, like, how do I get more of X work? Because I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a lot of people take on too much because they say, like, to your point, like, oh, it's just a cookie machine, where that extra passion, that like 25% wobble, can be used to take on special projects. It can be used to network within the company. It can be used to talk to people that you look at their career path and you say, oh, I want that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're bogged down with taking on extra work because someone isn't doing it, just because you lose the opportunity to mobilize yourself within that situation.
Yeah,
So I see a
totally.
lot. Yeah, so you have to be cognizant of what you want out of a company, out of a career, and also where you see those inspirations, because all of a sudden people find themselves doing 18 hours a week of just colorways, and they're like, I never want to be the person making paint decisions.
Yeah.
I want and then that's kind of like how your brick road is built.
Yeah. I think that's a
And
really good point. It's really tough thinking about your career in retrospect, like how much of it was planned and how much was just you were a victim of circumstance.
yeah, and I would say, like, as someone in marketing in a different area of a company, a lot of what I've done with my career is open up that flexibility. So being honest with saying I'm going to freelance right on the side, and I'm going to want, and I've sacrificed like titles and roles
Mm-hmm.
for that freedom, but that's unlocked the opportunities that have truly paid dividends over time,
Mm-hmm.
and brought me in front of people that are more important than what I would be doing otherwise. Some people got it. Sometimes you got to grind it out. Like everyone's done the 80-hour work weeks
Mm-hmm.
to get a task done, but that grind should be looking towards the end goal.
Yeah. I I think that that's a really important thing for people to at least consider because it's so simple to say like I'm going to be a junior designer and then a senior designer and then a manager and then maybe a director. And that's just it's such a linear thought experiment, but it's so rare that it works that way. It's so much more about like understanding patterns in kind of your industry, and maybe it makes sense to start off like at least for myself, like I'm really glad I started off at a really big company before I started freelancing because when I was freelancing now I know how a big company works, and I can take those things and apply it. So at least for myself, that order that I did that in made a lot of sense. And then freelancing with that mindset of like working like a corporate designer, I think kind of set me apart from people. And then I was able to then take a much higher position than I think I would have otherwise if I had just stayed with Samsung at a secondary company, because it's like, look, as a freelancer, I've been able to like balance all these tasks in addition to turning out decent designs. And I think that worked for me in that case.
Yeah, and I think it's also about learning from a not great opportunity too. Like
Hmm.
some of the biggest skills I use now were learned from opportunities I didn't want to be in.
Yeah.
Like at one point in my marketing career, I was doing strategy work for websites and digital marketing campaigns, but I was also selling it, and I hated the selling part of it. But now,
But you have a
sell
silver tongue. You're a born salesman.
well, and selling taught me not how to sell something. Selling taught me like how to listen to other people and what they need in order to deliver that
Yeah,
in a way that I never thought. I'm like, oh God, and I hated it. That's why I don't do that now.
that's
But
a really good advice.
some of the biggest lessons you can learn sometimes are from situations you didn't want to put yourself in. So
Hmm.
like and designers get that all the time. I mean, even look through time, like Ferruccio Lamborghini learned from having a broken Ferrari, not because he was happy with the car he had.
Yeah. I I don't know. I really like that way of thinking too, because I just think so much of what we enjoy in the world comes from having to deal with a negative situation or a less than ideal situation, and how we cope with that and how we get around it. Like that's for me where the real innovation comes from. Um, and not to sidetrack us too much, but what do you think of this little sketch I've got going on? What I tried to do is take a little bit of the angularity and maybe something fresh from those other designs, and apply it to direction A. What I'm kind of thinking is that I might have made the wheelbase a little short front to back.
Yeah, I was going to say you need to push it longer because I like the if you're thinking what I would love to see is like a body on this so I could see the rider triangle
Mhm.
because I think if you drew it they'd be super cramped and there's not a lot of foot room,
Mhm.
but if you pulled it like another you know 50%
Yeah.
and like and then if you, then you have then we have the opportunity. I think we need to lean back that front fairing to make it look faster.
Okay.
It's looking a little bit upright where I think the original concept like had that, but now that you can keep going too.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm just gonna grab this super cool guy and I'm gonna use him as a dummy.
Yeah, like maxi scooters are really cool because they have like this balance of practicality and speed forms.
Mhm. It's
And
it's weird that they're not more popular here because I agree with you on that.
well, and that's like an interesting point because in Europe you look at tiered licensing and you look at accessibility and insurance rates and none of those things apply in the States.
Mhm.
And for this startup company in mind, like this is where you start to blend like who your customer is versus who your customer could be
Mhm.
and where the white space is in the market because right now if I'm thinking as like the startup officer or the CEO or the CMO or the chief ideation officer, I'm thinking, well, there's all these individual single passenger vehicles out there. So like is my white space a two up cheap solution that's shared?
Mhm.
And that's where the business model can kind of flux.
So now I'm showing that this will fit two people if they're fine being comfortable with each other.
They're definitely intimate.
So this little square right here is supposed to be the rear passenger peg that's gonna flip down. I think the guy up front could actually be scooting forward a little bit more. So I wonder if I should actually make it even. Do you think it should be longer than it already is?
Yeah, because that person's going to have the back of their spine right on that cut on the seat, so
Mhm.
that's going to be a hot spot.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so I will pull the front forward a little bit. And what'd you say about the rake of the front end?
Making the fairing just kind of go lean back a little bit.
Okay. Do you think it should go up higher or it should stay low? Because it stays low, it looks a little more sleek, but it doesn't really do much for wind protection in that case.
Well, I like what you're doing with this cut here. On it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is going to be, you have a line where you can actually have different windscreens. Because if that's all like a polycarbonate plastic,
Oh, that's a good idea. A couple BMWs do that, right? Like having
yeah,
yeah, let's
and
do
then you
that.
can, if you toss that, that top line on the windscreen, if you move
This one?
that, no, way up on top, like where your,
That one?
but the
No.
magic of digital designs.
Yeah. Okay. I think that would. I'm just filling in some of these lines here. There's got to be some tunnel here for
Yeah, so
electronics
like
front and back.
that line, if you scooch it to be angled up more, you could actually blow the wind past their head or buffet it, or you could lip it.
Oh yeah, yeah, like some kind of little windbreaker at the edge.
Yeah, because that hard line from a aerodynamics perspective, that's going to be a weird break, so you're going to
Mhm.
get a ton of buffeting, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
why this design's moving, more utilitarian. So we're going to
Mhm.
want to bleed in more lifestyle aspects, but that is where like color blocking and accessories can add. Like I almost think that whole part could be a translucent plastic,
Yeah, totally.
like
This
a
one.
like an original Mac.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a cool idea.
And
And
that
then.
is also, if that's all like that translucent plastic piece and it's one piece, and you have like
Mhm.
rubber grommets to attach it, it becomes super cheap to make. You just need a gasket on the bottom.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I wonder. I feel like there's got to be something that we could do, like in the space in front of the driver's knees. I feel like there's a lot of empty white space here. There's got to be like some kind of storage solution that could be added
I
here,
wonder if you
possibly.
could, because if the person doesn't ride one of these, usually
Mhm.
if you had like a soft bag attachment that they could put a purse, because we don't have underseat storage right now like a
Oh
traditional
yeah.
maxi scooter,
Right.
so you're gonna want like a hook for a grocery bag or a gym bag, or
Yeah.
something to take to the beach.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe there's a hook and then like some kind of elastic that's part of the design that holds something close. Because I always cringe when I'm on like the bike or just driving around and I see somebody on a scooter with like two Trader Joe's bags on either side of the centerpiece, like just sitting there.
Yeah, it could be cool to make this bag like a formed neoprene that's weatherproof, but that you could also take away. So it's kind of like the Starbucks cup, where if the
Oh.
owner's walking away,
Mhm.
that's another kind of takeaway opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Maybe it's like built into the design of the bike, like those hard packs, those hard
Hmm.
backpacks. Yeah, that's a good
We're
idea.
gonna we're gonna need a rear fender too, so it doesn't
Oh yeah.
splash water up the back of the passenger.
Do you like the rear fender being attached to the swing arm, or do you like it more on the tail?
Well, so the reason why rear fenders are attached to like in those wheel positions is
Mhm.
because right now your fender needs to be like on road. It needs to be at the farthest. It needs to reach the farthest point of the vehicle. So
Like
that's
this
when you
is.
see like you see those wraparounds on motorcycles right now. You could do like a wraparound on the rear wheel for the license, and then a fender that comes over.
Mhm.
And I feel like if you extend it from the back, it's going to be really weak, because all your pressure is going to, like, as it's going down the road, all your pressure is going to be in a mount under the seat.
Mhm.
Where if we mount it to like the more modern scenario, like we can add a little bit of speed to it, and it looks dweeby, but it also, looks better.
So you think it should be on the tail, even with those points you made, or do you want it on the wheel, like that's attached to the swing arm?
On the wheel,
Okay.
because yeah, if it breaks off, it's going to get sucked into the rear tire.
Yeah.
and then you're going to crash, and then we have a multi-trillion-dollar lawsuit on our hands because somebody crashed a scooter in Ibiza and just ruined their club weekend.
That's how all good lawsuits start.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that works. That makes sense to me. I wonder if we could also have maybe the tail light down here.
Yeah, I would.
And then there could be a space for whatever the plate is. You know what? I'm thinking about the stuff that you laid out. I'm thinking the bag, if it's part of this, like that's something that ends up having to stay with it. Otherwise, you get charged like $60 if you end up like leaving the rental with this bag that is meant to come with them. That could be a little problematic if we're thinking about it from a product design view. Like if somebody's super messy and they return this and it's like all like filled with like leftovers. But I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a solution for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
you could almost do like an own your bag thing, like from a marketing perspective. Like if you rent this once, but you
mhm,
keep the bag,
mhm,
like let's say you have a 2 day, 3 day rental, the
mhm.
bag's yours. It's embroidered with your name on it because we're looking at a higher touch model than Lime.
Yeah.
That could be, oh well, I got this bag when I was in Hawaii and
Mhm.
they let me keep it, and look at how dope it is, and it's neoprene, it's waterproof, and it looks dope as hell. So that could be an opportunity to explore. And I like the idea of a soft bag because you can wash them and they're easily replaceable. Where if you have a hard bag and they crack, it's a replacement part and it's going to spend more time getting fixed.
Mhm.
And it's not a traditional maxi scooter thing, but I also think that's a opportunity to innovate at.
Yeah, I like that idea.
It's also
And
not a crash risk because a hard bag can shear off and a soft bag kind of flops around.
mhm. Yeah, like something just super simple and minimal looking like oh God, I'm blanking. It starts with a T. It's like Tomo or something. Topo,
Uh,
I think is what it's called.
yeah, Topo.
Yeah, they have really nice, clean, simple designs, and I think like if we designed it to specifically work with their kind of bag, like maybe it's like a mini bar situation where if you pick up one of these bikes that has a bag on it, like I like your idea of like it being like personalized for you, but I also like the idea of maybe it having a some kind of tamper seal across the front, and
Yeah,
like once you open it, it will disconnect from the bike, and now you owe the company. It gets like pulled off your card like $50 or something, and you can always plug it back in. Or if you walk up to an empty one, like maybe there's still hooks somewhere for just a standard backpack to still work.
yeah. And Genevieve makes a good point that it could still be hard plastic too. Like it brings in the option of this could be another thing to sell. Like
Mhm.
you could have your big bag option, you could have your minimal bag option, you could have your leather, it could be plastic. Like
Mhm.
that could be kind of a signature.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I this is see this is so much easier because I've done a scooter before, but already like this one a lot more just because I'm getting like feedback from like what you're thinking and like having an actual background for the design like makes it so much more interesting to me to draw because I usually have to just focus on like okay what's going to be like interesting looking in this moment, which is really frustrating because I can't always draw cool shapes because I'm just not that good. Okay. I think what I'm gonna do, since it's 8:30, so we got an hour, I'm gonna see if I can get a rendering of this thing completed, and I'd like to show the bag and like maybe some indication of um, what the what the locking, like what the system is that it like clips into, because there's so many different options for the bikes right now, but I don't think that this can be something that you just kind of roll up and it locks into the wheel, because if this is something that has so much more inherent value than a bicycle, then I think you actually have to think of something that's like an enclosed space, like a mini garage almost.
Yeah. And we have to work out like a dashboard solution, whether that's like your phone that you're plugging in or more traditional like TFT tablet.
Mhm. Okay, based on that like observation you just made, I think I know how I want to like render this, and I think rendering it from the rear is going to be good because you'll be able to see things like the dash. I was just going to try a silly trick. So before when I did a scooter, I realized that if I just took the side view and put it into perspective, like it gave me a good center line to work off of. But I think this view I have in mind is not going to work with that, and it's going to be, I don't know, it's a silly design exercise that I'm still trying to figure out because I really like working in side views because you can draw things like motorcycles super quickly, but there's only so many shortcuts you can take without making the whole thing look cheap and stupid. Okay, so I'm just going to try to fill in this space here um, with a view of this bike as we've kind of created it um, in a way that shows off, I think, as much functionality as possible. So you were saying you had a little side project going on with your Harley. What have you been working on?
Oh man, everything. Bought it 2 weeks ago, so I've been changing the bars and the risers and taking off reflectors and all the things they say you should leave on it.
How many reflectors does a new Harley have on it these days?
They're pretty. There's one. The rear light counts as a reflector, so that's integrated in, and the rear light also has this interesting design where it's translucent on top, so it also acts as your license plate light, so you don't need an additional fixture.
Oh.
And then you have your static reflectors, which are adhesive, and that changes. And all motorcycle manufacturers do them on adhesive because they change per market. So you'll have different lengths and you'll have different locations. Some will be higher, some will be lower. So I took all four of those off, and then I changed my bars to be lower.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but your bike is black, right? So you have zero visibility at night now.
No, I have all the visibility because I look cool. So
different kinds of visibility.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a Harley Davidson lowrider, and it's an interesting bike because as kind of like what we're talking about, like a design focus and a design vision. The lowrider was a new bike designed by Willie G. Davidson in 1977 because he saw what customers were doing to their heavyweight product. So they were putting Sportster front ends, they were trimming down the weight and making it look a lot sleeker. So in 1977, the response was the lowrider. So it was a Sportster front end on an FL chassis. And it was all of a sudden, like, this is a motorcycle that didn't exist for a category that didn't really exist because it was really only touring product or middleweight product, like the Sportster, like your Triumph Bonnevilles. And the heavyweight cruiser wasn't really a thing, but that bike kind of forged a new segment. And that was really Willie G looking at customers.
Yeah.
And
that documentary you forwarded was so interesting for that reason. Like, I was so excited to just, like, think about, like, design work. Like, is that still on the Harley TV website? Because it's just, like, whether you like motorcycles or not, like, learning about the history of the decisions that were being made in Harley, like, mid-century were just, like, super interesting to me. And, I mean, even beyond that, like, following it.
Oh, yeah. So it still is on harley-davidson.com/TV, which is a streaming platform we just rolled out last week. And then the interesting thing is, like, how an idea like that gets shaped over time. So, like, when the lowrider changed to the new Softail platform in 2018, they chose graphics that are off the Dyna Super Glide from the mid 80s. The bars and everything was built as a real callback to the early 80s, late 70s. And a lot of those decisions from a design perspective were to bring it more retro, and then with the idea that you can modify it. And so, like, the modifications I'm doing now are off that more SoCal customer performance based, where I'm pulling the bars down and it's more aggressive, and there's less flash. But that's why it's always kind of funny when you actually tear into a product and you see where design and engineering came to a solution. They weren't competing.
Yeah, right. I always liked, I mean, well, I didn't always like, because I didn't know this, but, like, in that documentary, the thing that I liked the most was that he liked to go and see, like, what people at, like, Bike Week were doing with his bikes, but he was always able to go back and, like, point out, like, how perfectly balanced things were to start with.
Yeah. Like when Willie G had a fantastic, and because motorcycles are weird, right? Like they don't work like a car because they can't stand on their own, and the person is 50% of the equation
Hmm.
when you're riding them. And he understood the balance of negative space in the motorcycle equation and what your eyes drawn to, and where that brand fits. So when you look at OEM Harley Davidson, even up to the electric live wire, the motor is the centerpiece, and you have a common unbroken backbone line, and there's a lot of attention paid to finishes to highlight or hide
Hmm.
certain elements of the motorcycle. And it's always fascinating because a lot of people say, oh, well, it just looks like it did 30 years ago. And that's not always true,
Hmm.
but that's all also part of the magic
Yeah,
is
right.
someone wants like a certain emotion and feeling.
Yeah. The tough thing I would imagine with that whole idea is that that point of nostalgia moves forward as things change. Like the point of nostalgia is never always going to be like 1969. You know,
Totally.
it's weird to think that like my point of nostalgia is becoming like the mid 90s and like the late 80s. Like I think a lot of like the angular forms that happen in my designs were probably kind of like set in some kind of DNA stone for me back then. You know, I mean that changes in the 90s when all the cars got like really organic and round shaped because Kristen hates all those cars from the 90s. I'm just like that's dope. I would drive that today, and I just get the biggest eye roll, which I deserve because it's not a good design. It's not. It's stuck in my nostalgia bone for some
Well,
reason.
and you also see how kind of customers play with the formula. So like
Mhm.
right now you're seeing performance Harley culture, which is people taking cruisers which have a design, opinion based many years before the late 2000s, but then blending it with how they ride Harleys and why they ride Harleys. So you're seeing upside down forks, and you're seeing, higher rear suspension. You're seeing T-bars, and you're seeing like motocross inspired foot pegs. And that's all based off people putting their own spin on the formula, which then kind of crash back into
Mhm.
bikes like the Lowrider S.
Yeah, it's
So
like
it's
a
like this,
feedback loop a little bit.
yeah, it is a feedback loop, and it's kind of like it's it's a little bit like music in a way, right? Like the pushing and pulling and sampling of different artists and different time frames,
Mhm.
make something new.
Yeah, I love a
So
good sample track. Like just that hit of like that that hit of recognition in the middle of a novel experience. I think music does that really well, but it is fun when a new design for like a new Ford comes out and like there's this little touch that like you know enough about the car. It's like, oh yeah, they did that 50 years ago and like they were really clever about how they brought that back in.
yeah, and things you don't even realize,
Mhm.
like things like when the Mustang brought back that unbroken dashboard panel in '05 that
Mhm.
called back to 64. They didn't do that because it's like, oh yeah, we got to call back to the original Mustang. It just looked really good.
Yeah.
And then they've been playing with that since then, and now you get a new Mustang, and it's minimized and it's streamlined, and you have room for a big infotainment screen, but you still have that really cool, look over the dash that kind of can pull you back
Mhm.
if but also just look good if you don't, because how many
Yeah.
people buy a Mustang and they don't know what a 64 and a half looks like.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that's when design's working its best, when there's just like layers of information that humans are transferring to one another through objects. Like I just find that like endlessly interesting that that continues to be something that like humans, whether they know it or not, are surrounded by design.
And it's really weird too, because when it goes sideways, like, not, I shouldn't say sideways, but when it doesn't, it's not timeless in that regard. Like the Plymouth Prowler
Mhm.
was, you know, late 40s hot rod culture
Mhm.
reimagined for the 90s, but it aged terribly.
Right.
And, no one's really chomping at the bit for another Prowler, even though it had all those emotional touch points of Lakesters and post war Fords and all these really emotional, moments in time, but wasn't translated to be timeless. or like the Chevy SSR,
Oh yeah.
or but I mean, then the
Can I
PT Cruiser,
can I
something like
share
we
something with
mocked
you
would,
though?
yeah,
I
go
I
for it.
liked both of those cars when they came out. The
No, they
Cruiser,
were cool.
the
I
Prowler, and the other one.
I remember, opening Car and Driver, and like when I was a little kid and be like, what is this? Like, this is amazing. And then you get older and you realize it came in automatic and it had a engine out of a minivan. It's like, oh no.
Yeah.
Like that same company made the Dodge Viper
Mhm.
using the same emotional touch points, because they said we want something like raw, like the original Cobra, and we want, this real fast form, but it wasn't obliquely retro in that way. It
Mhm.
just took the good and added its moment in time. I mean, you look at it now and it's like, oh yeah, those wheels are so 90s, and like,
Yeah.
what were they thinking with that interior? But that resonated so much more. I mean, they made a legacy where the Plymouth Prowler was just a moment in time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good one to offset it with because the Viper is just like something else. Like that's
Yeah.
become like a modern, I feel like design like icon.
Yeah, and that had the same compromises because Chrysler was broke at the time. They were coming off the K car and the minivan, and the minivan's conversation for another day, like genius.
Yeah.
But the Viper just used a truck based engine and kind of had the same, you know, oh well, we got to do it this way because we got to make this happen, and it just took off because it
Mhm.
it captured something new and something old at the same time.
It's so frustrating knowing that that kind of hit can happen and not being able to like queue it up when you have a new project. Like it's so frustrating that part of design that like feels like magical kind of because it's just like I didn't even mean to do that, but it's the right thing to do. And like it kind of like keeps me up at night because it's like if if I had like turned left out of my front door this morning instead of right, that have like led to a series of events where I didn't end up making that like wrong like brush stroke that ended up like changing how I thought about this project. It's just like it's terrifying when you think about it like that.
Yeah, it's a decision tree, but it's also interesting because like you look at a project like that, and even like the minivan, and they're very designer led.
Mhm.
Like the Mustang and the Viper and the Ford GT and the original minivan and a bunch of cars are like, we have an engineer, a designer, and a president of somebody in the C-suite who really believes in the Skunk Works thing.
Mhm.
Like, what is it going to take? And
Yeah.
it's usually like how there's a ton of projects on the other hand that like got people fired or in a ton of trouble. We just know the successes, but on the other hand,
Yeah.
like there's these things that live for years and years.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's just I don't know. I guess I care so much about it because like situations like that, like they just affect you emotionally so strongly. Like that's how I think like keeps people in design and like companies like Harley because there's so much emotion involved, but it's also what makes it so painful when it doesn't work out.
Well, and that's what I liked about when I was a writer, for Cycle World and Iron and Air, and you get a
Mhm.
chance to interview all these different people, and yeah, they've all been trained by a PR person like myself, or a marketing person, but you get them in a point and you ask the right questions and you get like the motivation of the story and the why. And what I always saw in the products I really liked and the motorcycles I really liked was this core fight in that, even if
Mhm.
I didn't like the end product.
Mhm.
They're like, oh, you know what? I remember interviewing, you know, um, I was on the Harley Davidson Roadster press ride in 2016.
Mhm.
And they're like, we really fought for this wheel combination, this wheel. It's specific to this bike. It's, a very complex mold. It's a complex cast. Like it's super lightweight. We've never done anything like this before. Like we got fought for it. And that was really cool to me because as a writer, I was like, oh wow, like I understand the motivations because they wanted to do that for this type of customer.
Mhm.
And same thing, like I was, Thrux and R, they were talking about how they, because I had an original Bonneville, and for the new one, they did the same trick where they hid the fuel injection in fake carburetors,
Mhm.
but they chose a different era. It was like an Amal carburetor, but they like had a different finish on it and all this. And I was like, oh, that's super smart. Like I like that, and that's where designers and their motivations are really interesting to learn from, and also how that can affect other stakeholders, because that gives
Yeah.
the marketing people ammunition, and that gives, the C-suite the strategic, ammunition they need to like take it up the chain. And then a harebrained idea like a V10 Roadster with no top becomes a good idea.
Yeah, I, it's just wild how many things have to line up for that to work. Like it might be like the seed of a really passionate like group of like product development people, but like if they don't have the backing, like how many amazing like projects have just gone by the wayside because of um, leadership that lacked vision.
Well, and I wouldn't say, and I've, when I was early in my career too, like when I was at Icon, like I would say that all the time, like, oh, they just don't get it. Like, we
Yeah,
want to do this, we want to do X.
yeah,
And what I
that's true. That's
realized,
maybe an oversimplification.
and what I realized is it comes down to like bad salesmanship,
Mhm.
because one of the one of the people I most admire is Lee Iacocca, and that, in a weird way connects the Viper and Mustang threads and everything else in Chrysler, because he was an excellent salesman internally.
Mhm.
Like, he didn't share popular products, he shared, ideas, and like made the right maneuvers based off of empathy for the customer. So like, no one said the Mustang was a good idea, but you lay it out and say, we have the Falcon, we have all these parts, we have all these pieces, we don't need to do an engine, we need to do XYZ, this amount of investment, look at how dope it looks.
Yeah.
Cool. Now we have a legacy.
Right.
Ford GT40, like
Right.
Dodge Viper, the K car, the minivan. Like, they have a broad spread of scope, but when you boil it down to it, it's salesmanship for those ideas and
Mhm.
empathy for the customer. And
Yeah.
that's what I've always liked.
That's the Venn diagram of success.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm, as you know, because we're friends. I mean, I can be a very aggressive, like
Uncomfortably
opin,
so.
uncomfortably opinionated. But when it comes down to, the professional side of like what you think you're going to bring a customer, that's when you can understand, like, here's where I can throttle it, here's where I can be more aggressive and put my, feet in the ground. And I've been burned multiple times, like at Icon, like it was a small team, and you would make opinions that would become products in 6 months, and if they were failures, there isn't like a consultant to blame.
Yeah.
It was like, oh yeah, this glove was stupid.
Okay, well,
And
it's time for you to make a decision real quick about where do you think we're at with this three-quarter view? Because what I've got shown here are two things. Like one, I've got the three-quarter view. I'm not sold on this area. I think I've fucked up or screwed something up here. Like there's just something wrong with the perspective that maybe I'll flip it around and figure out. But I've got the front dash. We've got the screen, that bag we talked about. I think there's gonna be an opportunity to show this flipped up and show where the batteries are on the inside, and then we've got the rear fender. And then what I want to maybe sketch out at the very end is I think some kind of like docking station like this that it can sit inside comfortably would
yeah,
be the
and
way
you
to
and you
go.
need and you need a shock on the
Oh,
rear,
yep, thank you. That's what's missing there.
and it's a little thin, so I think that's on the perspective.
You think
Like,
it
it
should be
looks
wider?
like, yeah, like you know I'm a large man, but that's like a one cheek seat, and it needs to be, if we want to have like a fashionable customer, but it needs to be, I mean, if you look at a three-quarter view of the C600,
Yeah.
like that, you can wasp that silhouette, and I think we can do the same thing with the seat contour to make it look thinner
Mhm.
without making it seem too wide. But I like the general, like the vibe right now is good.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
we have, I think the length is good, it's not too long. We have, it looks
Yeah, we could definitely add to that.
maneuverable. I think the soft bag adds a lot on the interior, and I think it's getting there. I think we need to play with this paneling on the side,
Mhm.
and if that's just because right now it's just like a flat sheet,
Yeah.
and like what that form could be. Like, do
Mhm.
we cinch it in? Do we, like that Gogoro thing? That's one round casing, or do
Mhm.
we add mounting points that become, additional back mounts? So there's opportunity there to explore. Um, but I like where it's at.
Yeah, bag mounts is a good point. Like Even just like having simple bars around the outside that they could like put their own bags on.
Yeah,
Just having something to connect.
for sure. And I think we need to play with the windscreen shape because for pedestrian safety standards, like that's never going to pass because we're going to stab people.
I don't want to
But
get that far because I want it to look really cool. So this is a concept right now. We don't need to
yeah,
get into.
and that's a good point. See, that's excellent pushback on because I'm like, oh God, we're going to stab people. But I still like how concept vehicles can still stab people.
Yeah. So we're
Because you used to have like a 1920s Rolls Royce and just cut pedestrians down at will.
well. I think that's why they were built
Yeah,
to
pretty
kill
much.
the gantry.
So, but no, I think it's unique looking. It looks approachable because I think the step through is the right path because it looks easy to ride.
I meant to bring that up
And
earlier. I think that was like I think for you picking that one, I didn't realize that that's also something that's useful is having a step through.
yeah, step over height is one of the big differentiators for anyone riding anything from
Mhm.
like bicycles to horses.
Mhm.
And I think this is really cool because this looks flexible enough to be like, cool, I can, because put yourself in the foot of in the feet of that customer. They're going to be in some weird place they've never been before.
Mhm.
They have to immediately feel at home to be
Yeah.
like, okay, cool, I can go down this bazaar and I can go down this weird alley.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Fair enough. Is somebody in your household watching Christmas Story, that Seth Rogen movie?
Carrie's watching HBO.
That song that's playing with like the high piano notes, like ding, ding.
Well, I was like stoked about how much electric motorcycle is in the new Westworld season.
Okay,
So
that's worth watching, right? Because I keep forgetting. I need to just get on that and watch it because
you
like
need to get on it. I know you forgot a bunch because so did we, but yeah, get on that for sure. Because
that
and the reason I'm interested in it is because it's not like, hey, here's this quote unquote badass
mhm
who's riding a motorcycle because it's badass. Like
mhm
they've made that vehicle make sense for the character because
mhm
she's going to different places really quick and it's maneuverable, it's untrackable,
mhm
and like you can do a bunch more stuff with it than you can do like the shared taxis. So I
mhm
thought it was like really dope how they did that. It wasn't just like the I Am Legend thing where it's like, and Will Smith's gonna ride an MV for some reason.
yeah, yeah, totally. um I I'm glad you brought that up. That's I've needed something that's like enough sci-fi to like really pull me in, and like I don't know, I feel okay being confused all the time with that show, so I don't need to really understand it fully, I think, at this point.
It's still confusing, but I like reading the takes more than I almost like watching the show. So we could almost do like a two-piece seat where you could do like if you do that cut, because right now it'd be easy because it's like one panel with like foam
Yeah.
underneath, but if you do two pieces you could do like a two up, like a comfort seat, or you could do like a party seat.
So like maybe it ends like right here. Are you thinking?
Yeah, almost, but I kind of like where it's at now, so let's leave that.
Okay. I'm gonna drop the wheels in because that I've found that working with stuff like this, like you have to get the wheel ellipses right first, otherwise everything else just kind of feels like trash. I know this is I don't know how you feel about this so far, but this has been really enjoyable for me to have you fill in like your response to what I'm doing because like I can consider your opinions a lot more easily than I can like express my own right now in this moment because it is obscenely difficult because all I'm really doing is like messing with a stupid circle, but it's just so much more involved in like the motor control that I have to like call in to play, and it's nice to have that balance of somebody else like working on this with me because it does feel like somebody's like designing this with me right now, which is what I was hoping
Yeah, and
for.
it's nice because usually you don't get the opportunity when you do like a design review, unless you work on like a small startup team where it's like, okay, we got like 72 hours to finish this.
Mhm.
Um, so that it's kind of cool to get kind of that live feedback. There's a lot of cases where you don't want live feedback because you have someone breathing over your shoulder be like, my daughter really likes red, so
Yeah. I hate that. I have had some managers like that. Like
we
want to be
should,
in the room as you make their updates they requested.
yeah.
Like, what do you mean it can't like move forward and get thinner and like I don't know. I can't. That's another thing is I can't draw and come up with like a new idea. Like my mental capacity right now is fully dedicated to things that I've said in the past or just like this mental library that I have to call on, which is surprisingly small in these moments.
I'm looking at some Nobblies right now, though.
Yeah.
Like if you had like a Dunlop D616 pattern, like ooh.
Okay.
You see that like that Honda Adventure scooter? Like it's a
Mm,
it's a maxi scooter
yeah.
that they're making like an adventure version of, and it definitely has like this cool Africa twin-ish vibe.
Oh, I like these tires a lot. This is what my dad's first Triumph Speed Triple, the 95 came on, and it looked like a tank. It was excellent. This one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to use this. I really like just pulling things off the internet, stealing them,
And
calling
I
them
I
my.
like with the wheel design, I think we can play with like if it's concave or convex. 'Cause I like the vintage look of that steel wheel, but I don't know
Mhm.
if there's like an in between where we can play with like machining certain aspects of it
Mhm.
to make like how rotiform blends like that old and new really well.
Yeah, they do have nice wheels. Let's see what I can do with this. I'm just
Yeah,
running
because
myself
that
in.
I mean that yeah, that's like gravel road and fire road and cobbled city streets.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. I'm on board with that. I think it's actually showing me. No, I'm okay with that. And I'm just sense checking the perspective on this. Like once it's down, then I can relax and just start like sketching over the top of it. But until I know that it's right, it's just like it's a mental game of like chasing my own tail. It can be very boring to watch me struggle. Let me just tell you that.
That's the best part. That's why people watch reality TV.
It's a lot less fun when it's just some quiet man in a room alone trying to draw a circle and failing over and over again. I mean, that's enough to give somebody like a panic attack.
They make movies about it. Shutter
Um,
Island.
Speaking of reality TV, have you seen the ads for that? It's like a UK series, and they're all on an island together, and they're all very attractive people. But like the hook that's supposed to be unique to this show is that no one's allowed to hook up, and if they do, they're out.
I have watched the trailer and I am in because every character is trash and like the Tiger King, I just can't look away. Like
The
it's
the
it's
the funny
perfect.
thing is like I still that stereotype of just the the British accent, like they still don't seem as like wild as like the people on Jersey Shore, but I know species wise they're identical.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, you got to listen to like a hard North Geordie accent,
Yeah, but they're
and
so
it's just
quick and clever, and like even though it's like a tough accent, like their vocabulary I feel like is still like twice what the average like Americans is it would be on reality
no,
TV.
I think they mondo over the English language. I think we've truly perfected it.
Yeah, you might be right. You know what? Do you like the view that I have right now? Because if I do this view, I'm gonna have to figure out what the swing arm looks like. But if I flip it back to the other side, we get just a flat wheel. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, let's flip it around
Okay.
because we're gonna have a double sided swing arm anyway, so
Are we? That's not what
we
I
have
drew.
to. I know, but it's more complex to have a single sided swing arm. It's more weight.
Fair enough.
It's more
Can't argue with
fragile.
that.
I know your Triumph Speed Triple love.
Yeah, but honestly, it's trash because when that
I mean,
when that
but
wheel has to
also, I
come
mean,
off,
I
it is a nightmare. I could never do it by myself because I don't have a torque wrench that can apply like 500 pounds in
8
a
million pound feet.
yeah.
I don't know. Honestly, thinking about it now, like as a concept, it'd be cool to explore the single sided swing arm because every other maxi scooter is a double sided one. So if we're truly going for the Monaco set,
What kind of powertrain do you imagine? Because like what I had been drawing before was a belt drive, but I feel like there's got to be something more clever than that, right?
no, belt is quiet. You don't have to worry about tension. You don't have to worry about lube. So I think belt would be the best for this application
Okay.
because it's not going like off road, so you don't have
Mhm.
to worry about like kicking a branch into it and tearing up the final drive.
Mhm.
Like I would do belt, especially for EV because it's got so much torque. You don't want to you get with a chain you get slap, you get more noise.
Mhm.
So like a belt, like that's why Livewire has a belt is because you don't hear the teeth grinding into each other and you don't get the side to side slop
Mhm.
and
Oh yeah, I never
even the
really thought about that, but the chain noise from a motorcycle's probably got to be insane, kind of.
oh insane. Like all the noises are insane. If you have a connector in the weird spot, like it vibrates at a high pitched frequency as you're going down the road.
Mhm. Yeah, but I never considered that. But then again, I've never had the opportunity to ride an electric motorcycle, unlike yourself.
I
It's
love it.
still it's on my bucket list. I mean, well, I
It's
on my bucket list makes it sound like a really unattainable thing, but I think if I really cared to, I could get on one next week.
yeah, I mean they're actually incredible machines. Like I love it. It makes way more sense. I mean Kevin Cameron is one of my favorite riders in the industry, and he said if they invented motorcycles today, there's no way they'd be engineered as gas.
Mhm.
It'd be electric because it just makes the most sense. And like it's way more relaxing, and you get it's seamless power, and you don't really think about it's kind of like the manual transmission thing. Like, yeah, you like the interface,
Mhm.
but like when you take it away and you engineer it right, you don't miss it.
Yeah, that's a really tough sell to um, tell people that you're not going to miss the thing that you think you care about most
Yeah,
because
like
you don't understand yourself well enough.
nobody misses polio because of the soul of the polio. And I think we got to play with that swing arm shape because it looks like it's bent.
Well, it's supposed to be narrower at the center and it's got to get wider. Do you think it should?
Well, it's like you got that kick up at the end.
Yeah.
Like how swing like MotoGP bikes are bent downward, like it looks
Oh, I see what
fast.
you're saying. Yep, yep, yep,
Like
yep. I think you're right.
you could almost flip that shape and it'd be fine.
Yeah.
I mean that kind, like when the Ford Raptor bros like bend their trucks after going off whoops and the bed just like becomes a V shape.
Mhm. Yeah, acknowledged. Correct. Let me clean that up a little bit. Here, I'll get an overall shape going and then I'll fill in the rest. So that's what I need you here for. I think I've been drawing swing arms like that for a while. Happier with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna get in some of the big shapes because I have a tendency to focus too much on the details, and I want to get that width that we talked about in here. So everything should be going in the same direction, but I'm just kind of like, you know, adding an extra layer around the outside, but in a way that hopefully doesn't make it feel flabby. I feel like it's very easy for us to kill time because I think you're very easy to talk to. But I feel like if anybody has any questions about any of the stuff we talked about, I feel like we've really had a weirdly wide-ranging conversation, which is also why I asked Joe to do this because I think we can easily start talking about motorcycles and end up talking about like societal issues and like I mean borderline philosophy about how people see the world because I think if you really care about this kind of work, like you can make those connections without struggling to really. It's just kind of an offshoot of caring enough about the object and realizing that it exists in a world with other people. And so because of that, you have to take those other people's opinions in mind, even if you vehemently disagree with them.
Sometimes too much.
I mean, all the time for you.
All the time.
You ratchet it down with everybody except maybe Carrie, but like you never go
Carrie
full bore
Carrie
because I know what you're capable of, and I've seen it on a very few occasions when you like really let it go with both barrels.
and Carrie is definitely an unratcheted take artist herself, which I really like because like hearing her talk about cars and bikes is way different than I would. So
Yeah.
I'm like she will get on my motorcycle, which is heavier than my Sportster, and be like, I could ride this,
Yeah.
and I'd like immediately think like, oh, because she can put her feet down, she can move it around in a way she couldn't my old bike, even though like the physics of it are hugely different.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, I definitely think and that's kind of, I think you bring up a good point about when you have in a work environment or a personal environment, having that relationship and understanding what the other person needs from the
Mhm.
conversation to
Mhm.
open up that door is
Mhm.
when you can make really good
Oh,
work happen.
totally.
That's a lot of like soft skill work, but
Mhm.
it can change a confrontational design review into a conversational one.
For sure. And I'm not really sure what class teaches that, but I feel like that's mandatory for like all like people leaving high school, like having that level of understanding of other people and how it changes compared to what your personal views are would solve a lot of relationship issues, not just professional stuff.
I think it's called the struggle bus class because I I mean, you get it, and that's where having like a good manager and having, reaching out to the right person in the company can always help.
Mhm.
And that's like someone that can guide your personal development. Like I've had, like a lot of people are scared of editing, but when I was, writing for Cycle World, like the editor in chief, Mark Hoyer, was incredible. Like
Mhm.
he was the polar opposite of me personality wise, but always framed it in a way that made the story better
Yeah.
and explained why. And that's kind of the how you can make that relationship at a company is when someone knows where you're coming from and you're clear with your intentions of being like, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I need help with.
Yeah.
um, yeah, they don't teach it, but it's definitely important to know.
God, a good manager, like just the idea of it makes me like want to like get a little teary-eyed just because it means so much to me. Like when I was at Pepsi, this new guy Joss came in and like one of the first reviews we had, like our director left and he looked at me and he just said, "No, we're not going to do that." In reference
i
to what the director wanted us to do, and I wanted to hug him so bad.
i had a I had an editorial review. I gave the article to Mark, and he just wrote like two sentences back. It was like 600 words or something. He's like, "This is not as funny as you think it is." So add, he's like, "I know what you're trying to say, so add what you're trying to say, not just to make people laugh." And that cut me in a way that was like deeply hurtful.
Yeah. That's my
but
favorite way to cut you because I like the look on your face when you realize that you're wrong when you really
oh
didn't
yeah,
think
it's
that you were because your
horrible,
crestfallen face is probably my favorite.
rarely seen, but
Yeah.
oft searched for. And like that's like,
It's a
but
real
that's what you
trophy.
want, because he wasn't saying that to be mean or
Yeah.
because he had a vendetta.
Right.
He was just like, cool, like this is the editorial backbone of the magazine. This is what we stand for. This is like you're providing a new insight to that and how we're evolving, but you're missing XYZ.
Mhm.
And that's like, yeah, I looked at some of those articles and, really fondly because it wasn't that, like when I wrote for Jalopnik, it was just whatever the fuck I felt like and
Yeah.
just funny haha and metaphors, and it was sloppy.
Right.
And then you look at the printed articles in Cycle World and it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. I mean, and that's also nice because now you have a new tool in your toolbox to express yourself, which I really like. Um,
Yeah.
I think that also, if it works well in a person, that trait allows you to grow as a person and as a professional. I mean, that's human development. That's the kind of thing that like I don't see how people can stay in certain jobs for like 20 or 30 years because I don't see how they can develop mentally. But I mean, that's also something I can say from a super privileged position, like to be designing digital objects that don't really exist, and people pay me to do that occasionally. Like, I mean, I'm living so many people's dreams, and I try to stay like really, really aware of that because like it's all fine and good to like talk about the stuff in the abstract, but I try to remind myself that this is not like also the lived experience of a lot of people, you know?
Well, and it's fear too, right? It's like a lot of people, and that's where having good management and good support is. It's like if you're worried about losing your job, if you state your mind,
Totally.
then you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's where it's important to under like if you have that strong backbone of the research and confidence in your ideas, because I've seen a lot of people too just get like walked over because they're like, well, that's a no, so I'm not going to fight.
Mhm.
And knowing when to have those arguments and the confidence to do so is important, even if you're a little bit scared,
Yeah.
because
Totally.
oftentimes the manager lashing out is just terrified themselves.
Yeah, right. Hey, I just think I came up with a decent solution for you. I'm putting flat track style number plates on the side of this thing.
I dig it because you can also, if that flat track mount becomes a panel you can pop off, that's where you
Mhm.
can hide the luggage mounts as well.
Oh, good idea. I like that. I'm gonna show some small indication here so I don't forget that detail, but like just a little gap. Yeah, I like that. See, I wouldn't have put something on the back because I drew a scooter a few weeks ago and it had this kind of tail, and I saw that I drew it, and I don't have enough time right now to go back in and really fix it because it bothers me because it seems like a design limitation. But you forcing me to do that is like led to this, which I like a lot more.
Also, you can also hide the shock behind that too. So visually, you can keep that panel smaller and stronger, and it still looks wider and longer, which
Let
I
me,
also think helps elongate the form too.
yeah, that's true. Let me know if you think this is a dumb idea. I thought it would be cool to have the passenger pegs be actually fixed posts because I saw like one of the things I always like from scooters, and I don't think I've done this since I was like a very small kid on like my grandfather's moped, is that you find a spot in the back to put your feet and it makes you feel like you're going faster. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I dig it. It could also be like a quasi crash bar if
Oh,
it's
yeah, yeah,
mounted
yeah.
right.
I do like that. Yeah, totally. Because now, if this thing tips over, this becomes the point that touches down instead of like something expensive.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
because if we're gonna mount the motor on the bottom there, if it
Mhm.
just extends out, then you're not scratching the casing.
Yeah. Is it still? Yeah, it is still called a motor if we're talking about. It's an electric motor, and that's yeah,
Yep.
that's the cylinder right here. I would so motors apply to electrics. Like I went through a stage where I was calling them engines, and I got really confused in my own head, like years and years ago, talking about like engine burns gas, but a motor, it can be anything that like moves an object, right? Like a human could be a
Yeah,
motor technically.
totally. Like when sports analysts are being like, yeah, that guy's got a motor,
Yeah,
it's
right,
moving.
right. Um, I this is way off topic, but I've heard recently that sports analysts have been like watching uh like fail videos or like just old games and they're like calling it, you know? And that just seems like a really fun thing to watch. Like if I
I,
was a
I would
big
watch
sports
that.
person, which I am not, like I would love to hear somebody like, watch a football game from like I don't know, how far back can you go when there's still video? Like the 50s maybe?
uh, 50s. I mean, there's 40s footage, but
You
it's like
know?
the weird, like sped up
Yeah,
people,
right,
even though
right.
they're going real slow.
Mhm. Like
And
I
this
think that would
is
be very
so you're
entertaining to watch.
actually drawing a very specific EV engineering problem, and that's the pivot point of the shock in relation to the motor.
Oh yeah. So am I doing this? So what I imagine is there's some kind of like a cylinder going through the center here, and this center piece is going to rotate with the swing arm on the outside, and the actual body of the motor is here and then here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you could if it's straight up and down.
Mhm.
So as the axis moves, you're actually limiting the travel because if you think of the shock at an
Oh yeah,
angle,
sure, sure.
you get more real world travel, and you're also increasing harshness. So you could also, like I would say, because this is a concept, we can bury that upper shock mount in the body of this
Yep,
because we're also not having a cavity down here for luggage, and our battery's pretty small
yep.
right now. So if we tilt it, you can have like more realized travel than you would if it was straight up and down. Like if you look at like an Energica, like the shock's straight up and down.
Is that how you
Eh,
pronounce that?
yeah,
You know, you have introduced me to the correct pronunciations of so many motorsports brands that I can't imagine how many awkward situations, like meeting people professionally, where I use that word, you've probably saved me from. Like, because you're the one
Just
who
a
told me that Deus is said Deus and not Deuce.
deuce, my little deuce coupe.
I mean, that saved me a lot of embarrassment, for sure.
It's all. We could also play with like the under shock mount option too, but that's super complex, and we'd be.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do some kind of shifter linkage that goes down, and there's something connected down there. I wonder if there should be some kind of.
You could mount it. You can have the shock bottom mount on top of the motor, because then you don't have to have a assembly off the swing arm, because you can kind of mount this. I don't know if you have like a weird cap on the motor where the swing arm mounts to or something kooky, but because it's going to get weird where that swing arm wraps around. Like
Mhm.
if you use the motor as a stress member for that sub assembly.
Mhm. Okay, I'm gonna draw this a third time, and let's see if this one floats your boat.
But yeah, just add speed stuff because it's a concept. Let the engineers sort it out.
It still needs to roll on stage, though. I'm gonna do some kind of like a, I think it's called a dog bone, like a triangular pivot point that's at the top of the motor. I'll just leave it like that for now. And then I'm going to do a little interior fender that maybe will keep some schmutz off the inside of this thing.
Yeah, because you don't. If they're going down like a gravel road, you don't want it to pack the motor
Mhm.
because then it would overheat.
I think I had. Okay, I see. I was just trying to be able to see the under drawing that I have here. I don't want to miss anything. Yeah, and I don't really feel like drawing the the belt drive right now, so I'm just gonna leave it on the other side. Yeah, I drawing motorcycles, it's a double-edged sword. I get excited because like I like them, but then I get really, really sad because mine is still at my parents' house
You gotta have it sitting outside like me.
in the snow.
It's not snowing up here anymore. It
Yeah, but
snowed
there was
last
like
week, but
yeah, there's 3 inches on the ground. That your bike
you
doesn't
you
have a
should
cover. I know it doesn't.
you should pull yours out now because it's ready.
I'm gonna get it on Saturday. That's the plan. Oh shit, it's already 9:20. Jesus, we got 10 minutes left, and I'm not gonna be able to finish this.
You finished it up. That's your assignment.
You know
That's
what?
where I get to play CEO and be like, I want this by tomorrow. We have a board meeting.
We should both post this to Instagram tomorrow because I think we both have ownership of it.
Don't at me, bro.
I'm going to.
No, I think it's cool. Like
I'm gonna
it's
name
there.
you as art director. Project manager actually is probably more accurate.
Consultant.
Yeah. I hope this hasn't been a waste of your time because I told you there'd be lots of questions and there were very few
Of course
questions.
not.
But
Definitely not a waste of time.
I've enjoyed this. I'm gonna tell other people I enjoyed it and I'm gonna mean it.
I want to ride this thing. I want that bag too.
The
That's
bag
too
is
much me.
overly.
That's too much me search. We need to take it out now. We need to go to like NYU and be like, hey,
The bag is
would you ride
overly
this in the
simple for my
would
taste.
you would you ride this in the Hamptons? I could see 30 of these queued up outside like Ace Hotel in Cuba.
How do you keep like kids from getting on it though? Because like I worry about the kind of people like when we were in Austin for the one show and like just seeing seas of the Lime scooters just thrown in empty lots. Like what keeps people from doing that? Is it like the worry that their card is gonna get charged 3 grand for this thing?
No, well, I think that like from a business case perspective, as like a semi-private like company, like
Hmm.
you're not going to have docks of these and you're not going to be able to just park them wherever. You'd
Is
have
this the
like dedicated.
Soho House of EVs?
Yes. So you would
Okay.
have like dedicated parking spaces like in a place, like either like, hey, we're going to have like these spots that we're going to dedicate per month to like 4 of them and
Mm-hmm.
or 16 of them, and they're not just going to be like on a sidewalk and open for everyone to come up and unlock. Like
Oh
when
yeah,
you
yeah,
rent it, you're still going to you're the only one going to be accessed. No one can
yeah.
like poach your rental.
It's more like a rental car as opposed to like a Lime scooter in a way,
Yeah,
but a more
totally.
accessible rental car.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good way to look at it. And that's new to me. Like that seems like a fresh offering.
Well, because you're still selling, like the idea is you're going to make less of these.
Mhm.
So you're not going to like pump out scooters, but you are going to be able to charge a higher subscription rate and have people buy them.
Mhm.
So that way you're not like wholly dependent on a user base to fund your company. Because
You
Lime's
know,
just saying, oh, we have to have X amount of people use this per month
yeah,
or we're bankrupt.
right.
Like this is a blended model where it's like, yeah, if we have 25% of the people own them on a monthly payment plan,
Mhm.
30% own them on subscription, 10% own them outright, and then a few have like free trials every so often on
That
the
seems like
marketing plan.
such a hard object to design, something that people are comfortable having a rental version out there of, because I think a lot of people who have ownership over a thing, like, don't want, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, because there's plenty of Camrys out there, but, like, I have
But
to imagine that,
that's the benefit of this is that you're not like rolling into Toledo, Ohio and being like, where's my scooter? It's like think of like a Vespa,
hmm
but in the same places you'd see a Vespa now, it's Italy, it's Sardinia, it's Greece, and you can just like plug into those spots.
yeah,
So it's like you are buying it. The Soho House model is kind of that. Like it is more curated,
hmm
it is more luxury, and it doesn't have to be cheap. It just has to be like durable
hmm
and easy to make because you are gonna like if you're gonna have 50 of these outside Breckenridge for like a marketing pilot,
hmm
you're not gonna want to have like it's not like Range Rover doing a demo ride where you're gonna have like $3 million sitting outside.
yeah, right, right, that's true, that's fair, I'm on board with that now. I mean, this is a decent, like, business model. I feel like if we could just get this in front of the right tech CEO, like, tech CEO, do you have 2 hours to waste? And by the end of it, you'll be mildly amused and maybe have an investment idea? That's a sales
Well,
pitch.
yeah, and it's a kind of a question of like if you could make so like we don't have a brand name, right? So
hmm
like is there a travel company like a Way Luggage, right?
hmm
So like their business case is suitcases right now, but they've said in their public facing comments they want to be like a catch-all travel brand. Like Away Luggage, like this could be your vehicle that
Your
represents the Away
getaway?
brand. Yeah, pretty much. Like, and then so like all this Instagram, this community you've curated
hmm
with these types of people, if you make this vehicle fit your brand, like this could be plug and play. And then the startup could be a white labeling for brands to get into the e-mobility space,
hmm
which is known as the hard pivot. So, but then you're being like, hey, Ace Hotel, like, do you want your own scooter? Because then you could take this platform and the backbone and then
hmm
just wrap different bodywork and seats around it. And then you're just working with companies to build it.
That's a really good idea because I've been to an Ace before, and they do often have like a pair of like Ace branded bicycles.
Yeah. Or you
And
have like, certain Rolls Royces sitting outside Ritz Carltons.
hmm yeah, I think that that's a really valid sales plan. Um, I like that. I like this idea more than now than I did when we started, which makes me think that it was a good idea for you to suggest this. So kudos to you.
Dear YouTube, find us funding.
Okay,
Do
so
you want.
I've designed the brake for the seat here in the back, and I also think that this can be where the seat can pivot up. Like I don't have time to get into how it looks when it does that, but that's me drawing in that functionality.
Yeah, you could totally hinge it there.
I'm getting really close to finishing this, and I like this sketch more than I think I've liked any of the other like apologies to the people in the workshop that Joe wasn't here for the other ones because this is for sure the best I think like demo sketch that I've created. But I honestly think that like I don't know if it. I'm curious to get your opinion on this, Joe. What does it say about me as a designer that I do my best work when I have direction? Like, don't you think that at some point I should be able to just create my own direction, or like that's like kind of a worry of mine. So just know that this is an honest question.
No, I mean, I think it's I know the things you draw when you're just having fun, like the spacecrafts and the sci-fi stuff, like uninhibited. Like I definitely know you have an aesthetic and like a design look.
Mhm.
So I don't think you'd have to worry about that. And that's a good toss in by Silvio about the front wheel travel because that's an aside I wanted to talk about too. But I think it's when it's kind of like a random project like this, everyone needs direction.
Mhm.
Because like even like chefs and myself, and when they're saying like, "Hey, I want a marketing campaign,"
Mhm.
like, "Hey, we need to make a press release." Okay, like, what's your messaging hierarchy? What do you want? What do you want people to know? I think everybody needs certain inputs.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I think I just closed this out. Okay. Sorry.
I think you could keep. I really like the form in the front wheel, how it's kind of hidden.
Mhm.
You can almost recess it in the fender so it has more travel than it looks, but it also doesn't look as rugged. So we would definitely play with that as it, iterates.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually like from the rear view that the front wheel, I think it's going to be mostly hidden, which is kind of a cool look because it makes it look very sci-fi if you can barely just see.
Well, yeah, like those '80s scooters,
Mhm.
like how they all have enclosed front wheels, I think is like really cool, and like BMW K1s.
Oh, I love that bike. That's another really ugly motorcycle that I honestly just really um enjoy.
No one liked it, but it did look cool, and that's. But I think you could play with that, like you have like kind of like a jet ski. You have graphic elements with the front fender, so it doesn't look so retro, and
Mhm.
you can kind of really you know you can play with that aesthetic.
Yeah. It's it's just so interesting picking and choosing the different aspects to a time frame like the 80s and like bringing things that worked then into a design now is just so interesting to me because it always seemed like growing up because I don't know, I'm 34 I think, and so the 80s was not that long ago, but like I never thought that stuff would be popular again, but it is. It's popular now.
Yeah, I'm excited for like it's going to be 2030 in 10 years, so they're going to be like, yeah, this is my early 2000s throwback, and we're going to be
Mhm.
right back there. So it's going to be PT Cruisers and Ford Focuses.
That's so weird to think about. Like, I don't know. I just like old people that have continued to like grow and are like doing yoga now. Like, I hope with my entire being that I'm an old person that's like still like learning new things. Because those are the old people that bug me and I think bother young creatives in general. They're just people who have just like decided this is who I am, done.
This is what I do.
Mhm. I don't know. I'm feeling this. This is like a decent I don't have a lot of like plausible transportation designs. Like, I think that that's an area of my portfolio that I've kind of stepped away from. I mean, outside of a few e-bikes, which I'm pretty proud of, um, drawing plausible stuff is always like a transportation design thing. Um, and it's really tough to do things that are interesting but also believable because those two things are inherently um, diametrically opposed often. I like to draw crazy things because the very fact that they're crazy makes them fun to look at, and I don't really have to
Yeah.
worry about other stuff. What part did I say? There's just a little bit of uncertainty that I have on this interior space, but as long as I make it look mechanically inclined, I think we'll be okay. I gotta put bolt holes around everything, so yeah. I mean, that looks like a decent. That's something.
Yeah, I mean, because now you have like when I'm walking into a meeting as a salesperson or the engineer, it's like here's here's what we're thinking about from a customer perspective. It's 2-up seat. We have modular attachments for luggage. We have this really interesting takeaway item from a softback perspective. We're thinking about licensing this product out to different companies, and this is how that could work. We have, this ease of use. It's a step through. It's going to be easy to use. It's going to be, you're not going to need a license to ride it. And we have this really simple and clean utilitarian perspective while still keeping these like very moto luxury elements to give it a lifestyle look and feel. And then that gives everybody the ammunition to go back and be like, cool, so what do we need and what do you want? And, and then you can say like, well, what's the price point of this? And like, can we do it? Can we build it to that? And then that becomes a platform for conversation, not like, I think the logo should be bigger.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. I don't know. I'm tickled that this worked out because, I didn't really know how this was gonna go because you're the first person I've had like actually on this that's not like in the chat, and generally it's a real spacewalk out into the emptiness of social media.
Well, I didn't expect us to be here when we started talking about this last night. So, I mean, that's the cool bit is, that's how something has a life of its own. It's not just like, because I could never do this. And that's the benefit of a team is the more valued inputs you have and the less teardowns, like the more something becomes, real and actualized.
Yeah. And teardowns are fine as long as they're clever. That's what we've established in our friendship.
Yes.
You can say very mean things as long as it's funny.
Nasty things.
Yeah, really nasty things. Okay, so I like this enough that I think I will go finish it off, but I want to get your input on colorways and stuff. And I mean, I think some of the decisions that were made visually can talk to the fact that this is something that people would rent, and like maybe I will explore that station a little bit more because I think that would be a much more interesting story from a transportation point of view because so many people can draw like a really cool car or a motorcycle, and then if they have to draw anything else like a person, a parking lot, anything that goes along with it, like they're done. There's just nothing there.
Yeah.
So I think adding something goes a long way.
Yeah, and I really kind of want to, like, when you think of startup vehicles, like Limes and Birds and Divvy bikes, they always choose like a very light color because it hides imperfections and it doesn't add depth. So I think we almost go the opposite way with this, and we try to do something real dark with like metallic hits to like make it lush, like maybe like a black or a burgundy or something that's like, maybe like a British racing green, something that's like rich.
Yeah.
Like
there's a lot of good greens. That's a good color, I think. Possibly.
Yeah, I think green would be like the good aside because you can kind of, everything from Jaguars to Land Rovers, and that's kind of like the realm we're kind of going with this. And like then you can have like plus it's like a good palette to do your pops of finishes. So it doesn't have to be chrome, but like your brushed aluminum, or if we want to make the number plates white or yellow or some other like kooky accent color, or just pull like a dark green versus like a highly bright neon green for some reason. Because like green does have a tendency to make things look older too.
Really?
But if it's like that blue, like that bluish green.
Oh yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
But yeah, I think we can make it look super deep. And then the bag, then you have the opportunity to make like you can color coordinate the seat in the bag. Or we could take kind of like the athleisure route and make like high vis pops.
Yeah, I keep thinking about like the colors that go along with like what's that really douchey gem? Equinox.
Equinox, yeah, like brushed aluminum, black, like flat black.
Is that a douchey gem or am I projecting?
No, Equinox is definitely the douchey gem.
Okay. Like you go there to be seen. Like you work out a little bit before you go, so like you already look kind of swole,
You gotta get your preliminary pump, and then you go there to to glisten.
It's like pre-gaming for pretentious assholes.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. I don't want to do a bad tail light because it's going to let this whole design down, so it's kind of where my head is at right now.
You could do like one, I don't know. I mean, it's a concept, right? So just throw the taillight in the seat because there's no way that's going to make production.
What about just like a simple, like horizontal light bar that kind of looks like something you put on a pickup truck?
Yeah, you could do that. Do you could throw it in an indent in the swing arm, but it might be too low.
Yeah, that's asking for a ticket, I feel like. That also says to me on a two-wheeled vehicle, I try to do wheelies and I fail at it.
I can't scratch it.
I think this summer I'd really like to practice doing wheelies, but with
I need to find somebody else's bike to practice wheelies with. So
yeah, fair
if
enough.
any,
That's probably smarter.
that's the problem is I don't have a trash motorcycle to practice wheelies on. My
Um,
wheelies are accidental and terrifying. How I think that's how my parents would describe how I was born too.
Here, I'm just gonna do a little indentation for like if a plate went somewhere, it would probably be right here, but we don't have to put it on.
Yeah,
And
well we can definitely fix that one in post.
if it did have a plate, it would say lit.
Lit AF.
Yeah, I'm feeling okay about that shape. This doesn't uh, this doesn't make my design sensibilities react in horror. There's some rough edges to it that I hope it fits with the rest of the design, but what do you think of that overall shape?
Yeah, I can dig it.
Okay. I'm gonna pop it off the rear wheel a little bit though, because now it'll look like it's got some clearance. Because before it was like glommed on, but I was drawing it that way because it's hard to follow all these ellipses in perspective without making it look wrong. There. Now I just erase away. I'm really glad you suggested that tire too, because like that also adds a lot of detail to the sketch in a way that like making up your own tread pattern, which I find very difficult, doesn't normally.
Yeah, it's good texture.
Yeah, totally is, and it took me 2 seconds to do, and this is like another one of those things that I'm learning from this like little exploration that we've been on for the last 2 hours that I hope I remember because it saved me a lot of mental pain.
Well, and it goes back to like where we want this vehicle to be, and
Mhm.
like when on a motorcycle, like in a car, tires are like an identifier.
Yeah.
Like you got like three cues, so that kind of can put people in an immediate place.
Mhm.
Because if this had like slicks all of a sudden, they'd be like, "Oh, that's kind of weird. Like,
Yeah.
what is this?"
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, I'm just gonna do one last thing, and then I'd be fine calling it unless you want to like do three more of these. Because I'd say we do no more, or we do three more.
I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Night night.
What are you talking about?
As
It's
the
only
design as the design consultant, I can go to bed at any time. Be like, yeah, I need this for I got a 4 a.m. board meeting, so yeah,
yeah,
throw
but
some
you're an
paint on
hour
it.
ahead of me, so it's not even that late where you're at.
No, it's not. No, but I dig this. Yeah, I think this is super good.
I'm just gonna give it there. Okay. Yeah, like I said, this is the final workshop. So if you were lucky enough to be involved in what is probably the start of a series of very bad decisions on Joe and my part in terms of our ability to share our ideas with the greater world, then yeah, stay in touch. If we end up doing something again, I have this WMU email list. So if you've been getting the emails from me, you'll keep getting them. And feel free to just reach out with any last questions that you might have now that the semester's over. I hope everybody liked this and at least learned a little bit. This has obviously been the most information-packed episode so far, and I really appreciate you giving your honest opinion, Joe, because it's always welcome and usually coherent.
Usually. Make the logo bigger.
All right, well, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you doing this. It made this a hell of a lot easier, and I'm pretty happy with the end result, which I can't say for all of them.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, and thanks everybody for your comments, and we'll do this again soon.
Totally. All
Talk
right.
soon, man.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too. Bye.